What's happening? Happy Friday to all of you. Thanks for joining me as always. It is very much appreciated. Joined by a special guest, Evan Lazar, on the program today to talk about free agency, of course. This is Everything Pats, a New England Patriots podcast. And yes, it is a Patriots podcast, but I want all of you to know that both myself and Evan Lazar have one eye on Twitter right now, just in case the Boston Bruins make another trade, especially a big trade involving somebody like Brad Marchand. So I would say thanks to Evan, because we all know Evan is not just a football guy. That's his job, but he's also a big Celtics guy. If you follow him, he's also a gigantic Bruins guy. So for him to say yes to join us on this Friday of the trade deadline, when the deadline hits at 3 p.m., I feel honored. All right, let's first say hello, Evan. How are you, man?
I'm doing good, Nick. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I just want you on the record before anything comes out. Are you okay if Marshy's gone?
Oh, man. I always hate seeing this happen, but I can't help but remember my feelings about Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett going to Brooklyn and what that did for the Celtics in the long run. I don't know if this will be as lucrative of a trade, but I guess when it's time, right?
All right, we'll keep an eye on it. I agree with you. I would say time to move on. All right, speaking of moving on, DK Metcalf, are you in on DK? And if so, what is your offer to Seattle?
Yeah, I'm definitely in on DK. I feel like there's two main factors here. One, I just love the pairing with him and Drake May. You have a great deep ball thrower at quarterback, and you have a great deep ball receiver. If you add DK Metcalf, if you could probably think of a handful of receivers that pair well with May and his skill set, DK is near the top of the list. I would say, just because of the vertical route running ability and the speed on the outside. So love the idea of DK Metcalf. Some of the things that I've seen floated were maybe a little bit even less compensation wise than I expected, which makes me feel even better about it. I figured that they would get maybe a late first round pick for DK. But it sounds like the Patriots with 38 might be able to be the highest bidder. Maybe you throw in one of your receivers because they just cut Tyler Lockett. You're now trading DK Metcalf. So maybe there's some value there from a Seahawks perspective in Kendrick Bourne or in Kayshon Boutte or someone like that that can play a similar role as DK in that offense. So I'm very interested in DK Metcalf. I think we all are.
Yeah, I was listening to you and Alex this week. You guys mentioned the whole moving back from 4 to 18 in that deal. I wouldn't do that personally, because even if I have an outside shot at Travis Hunter at 4, I don't want to trade out of that shot. So I would not make that deal if I were the Patriots, but I think all of us are interested in the idea of DK Metcalf. And Daniel Jeremiah on Pat McAfee just said a little while ago that, around the league, it seems like people feel like DK is going to be a Patriot. So very interesting. By the way, just want to I don't want to throw you off here, but Elliot Friedman said last minute possibility, hearing Marshy could be traded to Florida.
Oh my goodness. I don't like that at all. Send him out west. Don't. I saw earlier Kevin Weeks throw out Toronto. It's like, if he's a Maple Leaf, I might vomit all over the place. Like, we can't be trading him to rivals like that. Absolutely not.
Imagine Florida. All right, so if not Metcalf, okay? Brandon Aiyuk, obviously, mentioned an awful lot. Are you in on Aiyuk? And if you are, what is your offer?
I would have loved this trade last offseason, so I guess it would be a little bit contradictory to now come in and say no thanks after the ACL, but it does worry me a tad about the injury just because of the timeline of things. If we remember, we just brought up Kendrick Bourne. It took really till October for Kendrick Bourne to come back last year, and Aiyuk had a similar timeline with this injury, same exact injury. So you're really trading for Brandon Aiyuk for 2026 and beyond. You're thinking about the long term there with that trade versus hitting the ground running with a guy like DK Metcalf. So I would say I'm less gung-ho about Brandon Aiyuk, but I don't think the Patriots are in a position where they can say no to these types of receivers.
Interestingly enough, I want to ask you this. Jeff follows up and says, he's out on Aiyuk because of the personality. How much does that play a role? I know Vrabel obviously wants to change the culture of this team. Metcalf's had some on-field things with his attitude and approach. Aiyuk, we know what happened between he and Shanahan last year. There's a great story from Mike Silver on The Athletic about Aiyuk and some of that stuff. Are you concerned by the personality? Are you concerned about the culture fit of either of those guys?
Well, to be honest, I think if you're concerned about culture fits with number one wide receivers, then you're going to be left without a number one wide receiver because
Yeah.
they all got a little bit of diva in them. So that's not the position that you're going to get a bunch of Boy Scouts, and those guys are going to come into the locker room and be consummate pros all the time. They're going to want the rock. They're going to want their production and their volume in the offense, and understandably so. So, I mean, we can go right down the line. I mean, even a guy like AJ Brown, who I think is phenomenal, is sometimes ruffling feathers in Philadelphia with his cryptic tweets and all this type of stuff that he's sending out there. So I think you're going to have a tough time if you're competing at the top of the receiver market, looking for a guy that's a perfect culture fit. But with that being said, when I talked to Ryan Cowden down at the Senior Bowl in Mobile in January, he gave me a quote that I thought was really interesting just about the overall direction here personnel wise. And he said that they're going to prioritize effort and finish. And he said, I know it sounds cliche, but those two things are what Vrabel is all about. You know, he wants his players to play through the whistle. He wants nonstop motors. He wants all out effort guys. Now, I don't know if wide receiver is really in the same vein as, you know, offensive and defensive line, or, you know, those positions that you think about with that kind of stuff. But in general, when we talk about free agents and targets for the Patriots, I definitely think that those two boxes are going to need to be checked for them to give out $20+ million to a player.
We are going to get to free agency. Trust me when I tell you. By the way, Pierre LeBrun says Marchand's going to Florida. So it's going to happen. He's going to go to Florida. He's going to join Bennett. He's going to join Chuck. And I can't believe they traded him to an Eastern Conference team. I can't believe that's what they're going to do. Trade him to the East. So, man, oh, man. What a time to be alive, Evan Lazar. He's Evan Lazar. I'm Nick Cattles. Everything Pats, a New England Patriots podcast here on this Friday. Going to hit some free agency with Evan. Of course, you know Evan, Patriots.com, does great work. Catch-22 podcast, Patriots Unfiltered. I mean, the guy is just all over the place, doing great work time and time again. You can follow him. We even put the little graphic underneath his name for his Twitter handle at Easy Lazar. I'm sure many of you follow him more than you follow me, so you probably need to see my handle at Nixie Radio. Also, don't forget, do a couple things for us. Doesn't cost you any money. Doesn't take a lot of time. Just click that thumbs up as you watch on YouTube. That helps us with the algorithm, so don't forget to like. Don't forget to comment. Throw your comments in. Those help too. And subscribe. Try and hit 6,500 subscribers by the time we hit the draft. So we got about 6 weeks to hit 6,500 subscribers. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. All right, last one before we get to free agency, and I do want to ask you a draft question as well, Evan.
Sure.
Would you have traded for Joe Thuney?
Oh, man. I've really looked at left guard as a spot that is a sneaky need all off season, really, because when you look at the options that they have there, and I know that they've invested a lot of draft capital in that spot with Robinson and So and Cole Strange a couple of years ago in the first round, but none of those guys have really proven to me that they can play starting caliber left guard for an entire season, whether it's because of injuries or just performance when they are out on the field. So I look at what Washington did with their offensive line, and they go out and they sign Biotish and they sign Wiley and they sign guys that are just quality NFL starters. Barth always calls them nuts and bolts free agents, right? Like not guys that are going to make $25 million a year. So Joe Thuney, I think it would have been a nice piece. I would have done it. But at the same time, if they go out and just sign one of those kind of guys that maybe isn't a household name to a lot of Patriots fans like Thuney, but I think can play the position at a starter level, Kevin Zeitler is one that I've had my eye on just because of the age and the experience, and just come in and kind of be an adult in the room. Tevin Jenkins is obviously at the top of the market. That would be more a little bit of a splash. A lot of people like Patrick McCarry because he can play multiple spots. Like those guys might not cost you the same as Joe Thuney, but you're still kind of checking that box of, all right, we have an experienced left guard here that we're not counting on a big year 2 leap from Layden Robinson to save our bacon.
Yeah, and I mean, I look at Jenkins, and this is something, Evan, I'm sure you and Alex have talked a lot about. I've talked a lot about. All of us have the connections from this coaching staff to some of these free agents. And Jenkins, you have two of them on the staff right now. You've got Jason Hotailing, who was his assistant offensive line coach last year in Chicago. You've got Thomas Brown, who is now the tight ends pass game coordinator for the Patriots, who was, of course, the offensive coordinator and then the interim head coach and a bunch of other jobs in Chicago last year when all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
So, you have those connections. Jenkins, the one thing about him is, he's missed a lot of games in his NFL career, but he's a very talented guy. So if you bring him in, you do have still on this roster who nobody talks about. Maybe you won't have him soon, but you've got you've got Layden Robinson, you've got some pieces. Maybe you sign another guard as just a depth piece. All right, Karen Gregian, the OG. She wrote yesterday that the Patriots, if you're wondering, by the way, it's like Karen and Mike Reese are the two, I think, favorite people. You go to Gillette Stadium and you talk to guys like Evan, you hang out at like camp a couple days. I didn't do it every day, but it's just Karen and Mike Reese, the two most respected people on the beat. Been doing it for a long time. Tommy Curran also has been doing it for a long time, but Karen is beloved. She wrote yesterday, Evan. What's that?
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, she's the best.
She's the best. So Karen wrote yesterday that the Patriots would be willing to try Will Campbell at tackle before moving him to guard if need be. And she wrote, quote, he's been impressive to some in the personnel department. He's been that impressive. I watched Catch 22. I know you had a very emotional goodbye to Will Campbell.
Yeah.
Right now, what are you doing at number 4, Evan?
It's a tough spot to be in, Nick. I don't like the spot at all for the Patriots. I think we're all holding out hope that Travis Hunter is going to be there and the two quarterbacks are going to go in the top 3, but it does feel like wishful thinking. I think you can talk yourself into a number of different prospects at 4, and the honest reaction to that, or the objective reaction, is, well, then trade down. But the other reaction to that is, well, who's trading up, right? So like, if you want to trade down, somebody's going to want to, you need somebody to want something at the 4th overall pick to come up and get them. So I think that that's the tough spot that the Patriots are in. So as we talked about on the pod yesterday, you can really talk yourself into a number of different players at that spot. Campbell, Mason Graham, Tyler Warren, Ted McMillan, go upside with like Michael Williams or Shamar Stewart, just raw pass rushers that have incredible tools. If I had to make a pick today, I would still probably go with Will Campbell just because I love Will Campbell enough to make that pick. I think some of the things that you see with him on film, with his movement skills and his athleticism and his core strength and his ability to anchor and really move the line of scrimmage in the run game, just stand out as traits that are first round, top 5 caliber from that position. If you have a guy that has that kind of anchor and that kind of power in his lower half and in his core,
yeah,
maybe you can make up for the fact that he doesn't have the longest arms, right? Because if guys are getting into his chest, well, if he can drop anchor anyways, then it might not matter that he's not getting that first established contact into those engagements. But overall, I think that this is a tough spot to be in, because there's a lot of guys from the 4 to 12-ish range in my mind that are graded very similarly on most people's boards. And so now it becomes a flavor, a fit thing, I think, is going to be important in this draft as well. Who's a scheme fit? What's a position of need? Those types of things I think teams are going to maybe factor in a little bit more than they would normally at the top of the draft.
Incredibly tough spot, I think, at 4 for the Patriots. Of course, I'd rather have 4 that have 7, 8, or 9, but the idea is, you're right there on the outside cusp of maybe getting a Hunter or a Carter. I don't think any of us believe Abdul Carter is going to be there, so we could just wipe away that thought. That's a delusion at this point. So Travis Hunter, you're really hoping, maybe Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders both go in the top 3, and then somehow, some way, Hunter miraculously slides down to you at 4. I don't think, by the way, Evan, that's crazy. I don't think that's a crazy thought, because we know NFL teams are desperate all the time for quarterbacks, and they will reach for guys. So I don't think it's an impossibility. By the way, Carlo was traded to Toronto. So there you have it. So
full fire sale.
Carlo to the Leafs, Marchand to the Panthers. My goodness, you got Coyle going to the Avalanche. Let's pull up a quick question here. Super chat, $5 super chat. Thanks to Derek. Can Armand Membu be moved to left tackle?
I'm not a big fan of moving guys from their college positions. Now, the one exception, and we talked about Tevin Jenkins a little bit earlier, if you're a tackle that moves inside the guard, there's a really good track record of high level college tackles moving inside. I think, Joe Tooney is probably the most well known around here that did that,
Yeah.
college left tackle that moves inside to left guard. But flipping sides for tackles, I'm not a huge fan of. Membu is a great athlete. It shows up on film. He's explosive out of his stance into engagements, converts speed to power, great length and ability to just unlock all of those measurables and things like that. But I would definitely be more comfortable with him playing right tackle. And I don't necessarily think that rules the Patriots out of taking Membu. If you sign Ronnie Stanley on Monday or you sign Cam Robinson on day one of free agency, and then you draft Membu like the Chargers just did with Joe Alt, now you kind of feel like you fixed your offensive line with those two big moves. So I'm not saying that Membu is not an option for the Patriots, but I'd leave him at right tackle.
Friend of the podcast, Evan Lazar, with us. Of course, on Patriots.com. Joining us on this Friday, Everything Pats, a New England Patriots podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Help a brother out as we build this community. You just mentioned Ronnie Stanley. You mentioned Cam Robinson. I would guess that Cam Robinson is your plan B. Your thoughts on Robinson, Evan? And if you can't get A or B, do you have a C?
Yeah, I think Ronnie Stanley, just to start there, that he would be the guy that I would prioritize at the front of the line. I'm going after Ronnie Stanley with everything that I got. I think he's the best player for the Patriots in this free agency class. I actually just watched his playoff run, those 2 games last year with Baltimore, and I didn't see him lose too often in pass protection. He's 12th in pass block win rate during the regular season, a very high level pass protector, great length, 35-inch arms, loves that 2-hand punch, get that extension, make guys go the long way home to the quarterback. And, he's blocking some high level guys on Buffalo, Greg Rousseau, Highsmith with the Steelers. These aren't, run-of-the-mill pass rushers that he's really keeping at bay. So Ronnie Stanley's the guy I go after. I do like Cam Robinson a little bit for the Patriots just because, that's an adequate average NFL starter at left tackle. I wouldn't have any questions going into training camp who the Patriots starting left tackle week 1 is supposed to be. It would be Robinson, more of a power-based player than Stanley, who's more of an athlete. But Robinson, he can get the job done, and that's better than what they got.
I got to be honest, I was a little rough on Robinson based off his playoff game, which was just atrocious. Yeah. I think we were all horrified watching him play that game. And he didn't have a good year this year, obviously. But then I came across Pro Football Focus in a blurb saying, Robinson posted a 67.2 blocking grade this year. But when you look back since 2021, his blocking grade is actually a 77, which ranks 13th among qualified tackles. So the point is, it was a rough year in 2024, but before that, he was one of the better tackles in football. So it's not a terrible idea. It's far from a terrible idea. I don't know how much money's going to cost. And we talked about coaching connections. Let's not forget, obviously, with the Doug Marrone thing and down in Jacksonville. So there's that connection as well. Thank you for the $2 super chat from Justin Strickland. It is much appreciated. And then he followed it up with a $5 super chat. Shaq Mason, what do you think? Reasonable? No, thank you.
I'm going to say no thank you on Shaq Mason simply because he's a right guard. And I think you've already got Mike Onwenu as your one penciled in, sharpied in starter there at right guard. And I'm hoping that Onwenu has a full season where they're not moving him around all over the offensive line like they have the last couple of years. So Shaq Mason, great Patriot, great career here, but he's in year 10, year 11, something like that, all almost exclusively playing the right guard spot. So I doubt that he would be very comfortable with moving to the other side at this point.
All right, let's get back to free agency. If the Patriots can't land wide receiver 1 via a trade, whether it's Metcalf or Aiyuk or A.J. Brown, what do you do at that position next week?
I love Chris Godwin for them. I know that that's sort of in the same category of maybe a dream scenario, if you will. But I just feel like Chris Godwin in a Josh McDaniels offense is a great marriage, a power slot that's going to run through the middle of the field, that's going to hit over the middle, crossers and posts and skinnies and slants and all that good stuff. And then he can block in the run game and he can hold his own there as well. I know he's coming off the injury. I think that's like the one pause that all of us have with Chris Godwin, but it's a great scheme fit. That's an engine of your offense type player, somebody that Josh McDaniels could really feed targets to once he is healthy. And I love that he dominates the middle of the field, which is very good for Drake May and the Patriots.
Giardi today wrote that, it could cost you $25 million a year. Are you in on Godwin at $25 million?
I would be, but I would like to keep it short term. Realistically, with all these guys, if you can get to him at 3 years, between 70 and 75 million, maybe it's mostly a 2-year, 2.5-year deal type thing. I would do it. And he's only 28 years old. So I don't really think age is the biggest factor here. It's obviously the injury history that there are some concerns. But like I said, it's too good of a fit to me between the quarterback and the offense schematically to not go after Godwin with everything.
Evan, during the offseason, the early parts of the offseason, I'm looking at the team, I'm looking at the roster, I'm saying to myself, yeah, left guard could be a need, but is it that big of a need? I mean, you drafted Layden Robinson last year. You got Cole Strange coming back, maybe, possibly. You got City, so I mean, you got some guys, right? You would imagine Onwenu is going to stay at right guard. Hopefully, fingers crossed that they actually just keep him there this time around. But how high of a priority is actually left guard for you this offseason, man?
I would say that it's probably fourth or fifth. I mean, you're still going wide receiver, you're still going offensive tackle, and you're still going pass rush, I think, before you start to talk about left guard. But I think it just goes back to Vrabel mentioned this when we were at the combine on one of his 3 or 4 different media tours that he did there in Indy, and he just said that they would like to get to a point where they kind of have NFL players at every spot, right? Where they feel like if they had to suit up next week and play a football game, that they would feel pretty good about the 22 guys that they're going to put out there on offense and defense, and that allows you in the draft to go best player available at 4 overall and really hone in on upside and talent in the draft instead of doing what they did last year, which was need. They draft based off need, and I think they'll be the first to admit that with the picks that they made. So if you get a left guard that can play, if you get a left tackle that can play in free agency, even if they're not elite blue chip talents, at least you're not forcing yourself to draft one in the draft come April. So that's why I would look at those spots as places that they can just set it and forget it with certain average, to above average NFL veterans in the market.
Evan Lazar with us from Patriots.com. Let's jump to the defensive side of the football. Again, I try to do my homework, and my homework tells me that Evan Lazar is not necessarily the biggest Milton Williams fan. First, why? And then if you don't want to spend that kind of money on Williams, what are you doing on the interior of that defensive line?
Yeah, I think the biggest concern that I have with Milton Williams is that it's pretty clear to me that he's not the number one in that Eagles pass rush, right? Like if we talk about it almost like we talk about wide receivers, they're giving all the attention the opponent is to Jalen Carter, to Nolan Smith on the edge, to Josh Sweat on the other side. And is Milton Williams the third or fourth best player on that Philly defensive line? And how much attention was he really getting? What matchups was he drawing on the interior? Those things concern me about paying him top of the market. Like not that saying that he's a bad player. It just is something that I just am concerned about. Like if he comes here and now he's the Tuesday player, all the attention is on him, he's getting all the double teams and all those types of things. Is he going to be as effective as he was in Philly, where he only played about half the snaps? One of the things that stands out to me on film with him on a positive note, we mentioned effort and finish earlier on in the show. He checks both those boxes. This is a guy that's got a nonstop motor, great in pursuit, runs plays down constantly. But if you were playing him at 70% of the snaps instead of 48% of the snaps, how much of that motor carries over? And you see time and time again, the line will slide to Jalen Carter. He's got a one-on-one against the left guard and he beats him. And to his credit, he wins a lot of those one-on-one matchups in the pass rush. But what happens when those double teams are coming his direction? And maybe that frees up Keon White or Christian Barmore, hopefully, if he's fully healthy. But that's my pause with Milton Williams, even though I think he's a good football player. He's an undersized interior pass rusher that I have a little bit of concern with is sort of like the complementary piece in Philadelphia and not the guy.
Defensive line is so interesting to me because we know this system's going to change with Vrabel and Williams. We understand that you're going to have a lot more aggression on that defensive line, a little bit more pin the ears back, a little bit lighter on the edges, not worried about containing the run or the edge too much, right? Or as much as they used to be. Interior defensive line, as you've mentioned, Evan, they're going to try to get that push up the middle. And then you've got just questions on the personnel. Like Christian Barmore, is he back? Hopefully. If he comes back, is he ever the same guy? Keon White, is he inside? Is he on the edge? How does his role change? Does it change with the new coaching staff? Who do you bring in? In free agency, maybe in the draft? Do you look at somebody like a Mason Graham? You've got Aquale, who's a free agent. I like the idea of bringing him back because I think he's a better fit with Vrabel and Williams than he was with the prior regime. But you've got Wise, who I don't think is coming back. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this unfolds on the defensive line. I know you were a big fan of Zach Bond. He's obviously done. He's staying in Philadelphia. Evan Lazar, the GM, right? Oh, sorry. The Crafts don't like that. Evan Lazar, the vice president of player personnel, whatever we want to call you. It's your front office this offseason, my man. You're looking at edge/outside linebacker. What are you trying to get done?
Yeah, I look at Azeez Ojulari, who I think is a player that maybe has some untapped potential. You bring him in, you give him to Mike Vrabel and Terrell Williams, two guys with defensive line backgrounds and know how to school up pass rushers. Maybe you can get that early round draft talent out of a guy like Ojulari. I think he's a nice player for them, and I'd be interested in. I know Malcolm Koonce's name is circling around a little bit right now.
Yep.
He kind of reminds me a little bit of Josh Uche, right? You can have that situational pass rusher on third down. But you mentioned it a little bit there. And to me, it's really big when we talk about free agency. This is such a good defensive line draft. Like there are just edge rushers and defensive linemen, interior guys in droves in this draft. And if I was the Patriots, I would be setting myself up with free agency to draft some of those edge rushers and pass rushers in this draft coming up, whether it's a guy on day 2 or even a guy at 4 overall that can come in and upgrade the pass rush. So, I mean, we can go on for days and days about all of the guys that can play the edge in this draft. I probably will end up with somewhere to 12 to 15 starter grades on edge rushers in this class. So they can have options and then some in come April. So if you go tackle, you go receiver, you look at positions that are a little bit weaker in this draft class and you fill those in free agency, and then you can free yourself up to really rebuild that pass rush through the draft.
Yeah, I mean, you got guys like Grant, you got guys like Alexander. These guys, I mean, this is just an absolutely loaded class on the defensive line. You got some question marks. Mike Green's got some stuff off field that's been mentioned. Pierce has some stuff off field that's been kind of rumored swirling around him. I know he's addressed those concerns, but, do you really believe in what he has to say? So there are some questions, but the depth is no doubt, it's unequivocal on that defensive line for this draft. All right, don't forget, you got about a handful of questions left for Evan. But before we move forward, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Those 3 things help out this podcast. I'm a one-man band. I get people like Evan cool enough to say, you know what, Nick, I'll spend a half hour or so with you. It means the world to me, but so does your support. So don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And, of course, Spotify, Apple Pods, rate and review. Cornerback. I'm a fan of Alex Austin. I believe you're a fan of Alex Austin to a point. He's shown some potential, obviously had the injury last year. How much are you willing to spend? Because if you read from some of your brethren, like my guy Andrew Callahan, his partner Doug Kai, they've written about the cornerback position, that the Patriots are going to actually look at cornerback and have that position as pretty high up on the priority list. For you, where do you stack cornerback up opposite of Christian Gonzalez and what you want to do?
Yeah, it's probably, like we keep on saying, behind receiver, tackle, pass rusher, but a corner and really number 2 corner that can play on the opposite side, the field corner spot of Christian Gonzalez is a spot that they need to fill, I think, with a little bit better of a body type than what they've had in the past. I think Jonathan Jones has been miscast as an outside corner the last couple of years. If he does come back, you'd love to see him back in the middle of the field, whether it's the slot or safety. Marcus Jones, same thing. Let him play the nickel, let him play inside. So if I'm looking for Patriots corners, like I don't know if I'm necessarily needing to go Travarius Ward or really break the bank with another 10 plus $15 million player. 10 to $15 million is probably what he's going to get on the open market. I'm not saying I would hate it, but if you want to spend those resources elsewhere, I love Rasul Douglas. He's obviously in Buffalo for the last couple of years here, and he to me is just that solid, dependable NFL veteran that can play the number 2 spot. And know that Christian Gonzalez is going to take the number 1 receiver every week. So I'm interested to see how they differ a little bit from the old Belichick system of all the man-to-man that they played and the game plan matchups every single week and things like that. This might be a little bit more boundary field and that type of thing with Vrabel, because they did play a little bit more zone in Tennessee than what the Patriots are used to. So maybe they want somebody over there on the other side that can ball hawk a little bit and let Gonzo just kind of take his guy out, which is something that Ward can definitely do and is very good at that. So if they're going to go in that direction, then I could see why Travarius Ward would be of interest. But I think there's other guys, like Carlton Davis, like Rasul Douglas, that could go out there and just play the spot at the level that you need them to.
Vrabel mentioned the nickel last week at the Combine and highlighted how important that position is in 2025. Do you think that Vrabel thinks they have the answer at nickel right now on this roster?
I don't, and the main reason is I think nowadays the nickel spot, it's becoming a lot more popular that player needs to have some size and has to have some sturdiness against the run. Mainly because you're seeing two things. One, you're seeing a ton of RPO offense, right? So these college schemes, the Washington Commanders type offenses, the Baltimore Ravens that run a lot of those bubbles and screen passes and things like that. To the perimeter off their RPO action, you have to be able to have a nickel that can take on blocks and that can go out there and make plays on those screens and those ball carriers. And I would say the second thing is all these outside zone teams. You have all the Shanahan inspired offenses. So a lot of those offenses are trying to run to the numbers. They're trying to run to the outside. And if you're going to do that, they're trying to put the corners in the fit. They want to put the corners at the point of attack, and they want to dare your corners to tackle and dare your corners to take on blocks. So if you're going to have those types of things, and the nickel is almost like a Sam linebacker at that point, you have to have some size at that spot. So I love Jonathan Jones and Marcus Jones. I think those guys are great man corners that can run with those speedy guys, Hill, Waddle, players like that. But for this defense, I wouldn't be surprised if they go after somebody that has a little bit more size to him that can play that position.
Another fascinating position, Evan, and I got a couple more for you. Then we'll bounce on this Friday. Sure, you want to enjoy your weekend. You've been traveling around the world the last month covering the Patriots. Again, great work, and I'm not blowing smoke up your shorts. I truly mean that.
Thank you.
Safety is also interesting to me. You've obviously got Duggar. Had a bad year last year, but said, hey, look, I was playing on one wheel. What do you expect, right? And then you got Peppers with the off the field stuff, seemed to clear up. But you also have Marcus Jones. You could bring back Jonathan Jones, maybe look at those guys as possible free safeties. I know that you're a fan of Javon Holland and that idea. Are you spending money at safety? And if you do spend money at safety, what are you doing with the aforementioned Peppers and Duggar?
I would definitely go after Javon Holland as well. He's one of my top targets in this free agency class. And the main reason I just feel like those guys never fit well together back there, truly. Like Peppers and Duggar, it always felt like somebody was playing against their strengths, that someone had to play up top and play the free safety role and play center field. And both those guys just are much better when they're closer to the line of scrimmage and closer to the ball. So I would much rather see them be able to get back to that, where it was Devin McCourty in center field and it was Kyle Duggar or Patrick Chung in the box. And everybody had a role. Everybody knew where their home was and where their sweet spots were on the field and what their assignments were going to be. And Javon Holland, to me, just feels like he puts everybody back in order back
Yeah.
there.
Yep.
And I think he's a great player. I think he's been elite at times for Miami as that free safety. So I don't know what that means for Duggar and Peppers. I think you're selling awfully low on both those players if you look into trade markets and things like that for them right now. I would obviously lean towards keeping Duggar and maybe walking away from Peppers in some capacity and signing Javon Holland. But at some point, you have to realize that playing two box safeties at the same time and having one having to play up top, it just doesn't fit the same or as ideally as you want. And the last thing on Holland, Vrabel had Kevin Byard for years in
Yep.
Tennessee as
Yep.
like an all-pro caliber safety. And I just look at Holland and I say, okay, you can play the exact same role that they played Byard in. And Byard had great interception totals, great production, playing in a Mike Vrabel defense. So it just seems like it all fits together better if you have a player like that.
Couldn't agree with you more, my man. I mean, we've been looking at the safety position, and it's clear that Duggar Peppers are more in the box guys, and you got two of them. You try to put Duggar in the back, and you try to have him roaming around. That's not his strength. He's been uncomfortable the last couple of years to me. Even if he had the injury issues, which he obviously did last year, it's still not where he wants to be. I would imagine it's not where he's comfortable. So you've got to start making some tough decisions. And I wonder if, Peppers will be the odd man out or what they're going to do there. It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. All right, two more questions. Here's the penultimate question for Evan Lazar. What would Evan Lazar's what a freaking failure free agency look like?
Oh man. So we had somebody call in, and I don't name names because I don't want to pick on this person because they're a great listener, but there were some names that they threw out, the Joey Bosa's of the world, the draft Ashton Genty in the first round, right? Like these types of things. And the one thing, and I understand a lot of Patriots fans are just clamoring for some excitement and for some players that are recognizable names, whether it's Joey Bosa or it's signing or trading for Cooper Kupp or signing Tyler Lockett or whatever the case may be. And I get it. I get that we're all starving for some household names here on this roster, but I would be a little bit more patient than that and just be a little bit more picky. Like, they have a ton of cap space. They have a young team, a young quarterback. And I just think that those guys are over the hill. A lot of those guys have played their best football, and Bosa really hasn't been consistently good for multiple years now, or healthy really for multiple years now. So I would love for them to prioritize, those 26 to 30-year-old free agents that are going to have a little bit of runway here, that can build a little bit with Drake May. I think their intentions in 2021 were good. Like, I think that free agency class had the right thought process of guys on second contracts, guys that are still in the primes of their careers. They just didn't hit enough on offense. They didn't hit enough on the skill players, and the quarterback flamed out. So if you assume that it works out better this time around with Drake May, and you get some of those guys to pair with him that have a little bit of runway, then you're in good shape.
All right, so we get the last one coming up. You just answered some of it, obviously, but I'm hoping for you to give me some names here as you collect the home run free agency. But I remind people, like, comment, subscribe before I get Evan's answer. Those three things help us an awful lot. Just click that thumbs up. Doesn't cost you any money. Doesn't take a lot of time. Just click that thumbs up, throw a comment in, tell Evan how great he is, or tell him how much he stinks. Tell me how much I stink. You guys just stink out loud. Both of you, Cattles and Lazar. All right, so home run free agency. Evan Lazar, he walks up to the podium, and he's standing at the podium, and he's proud as a peacock, chest out forward towards the media at the next little Evan Lazar in the front row. What are the names? Give me like, I don't know, 5 or 6 collected names here that you think's reasonable, that you would say, hey, Nick, that's a home run. If they could get 4 or 5 of these guys, it's a home run.
Yeah, so I think starting at the top, and this is just caveat aside, let's just go free agents, right? I'm not talking about if they can pull off a trade for DK Metcalf or AJ Brown or something like that, but just for the guys that are going to be available. I think the 3 guys at the top to me are Godwin, Holland, Stanley, right? Like if they come out on Monday or Tuesday with those three guys on its own, I'm a happy camper right then and there, right? I think those three guys would really help out. I love Levi Ozawuki from Detroit, right? I think that he's one of those guys that can just play a really sturdy defensive end for them, kind of be a younger version of Dietrich Wise, maybe a little bit more upside there. Was with Terrell Williams with the Lions last year. So there's a fit there and a relationship there.
Right.
I'm a big fan of Makari just because he can put out fires. You can always use that offensive lineman that whether it's tackle, it's guard, that he can go out there and somebody's hurt, somebody's dinged up, has to miss a game here, miss a series there. You have somebody that can just go around the offensive line. I think ideally, he's your sixth offensive lineman. Maybe one of those young guards emerges in training camp, and then he can just be a top backup, and really back up almost all five spots. So I'm a big fan of that as well. And I'll give you one more. I mentioned Ojulari earlier. I think, he would be really good for them as an edge rusher and come in here and allow him to develop with Vrabel and, get that chest pad on Vrabel and have him work his hands and things like that. But I also really like Jermaine Sherwood. I think that name being thrown out is not a mistake. Get some more athleticism at linebacker, some coverage ability at linebacker, and pair him with Jawan Bentley, and that would be a nice little compliment there.
I've been dying for more athleticism at linebacker for like the last 5 or 6 years, and I feel like we might get there this time around with Vrabel and Terrell Williams. He's Evan Lazar. He's really good at what he does. At Easy Lazar, working hard. I'm Nick Cattles. I host this podcast, do some other things, 98.5 and all that good stuff. Evan, man, it's been great to catch up with you. Everybody, thanks for joining us on this podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I will be back on Monday. If something big happens over the weekend, of course, I will jump on a breaking news podcast. I'm working at 98.5 on Sunday from 2 to 5, so a little bit of a free agency preview there, and I'm sure I'll have a lot of thoughts on the Bruins trade deadline. But until next time, I appreciate you.